I want to start with a harbor. Not a metaphorical harbor. Not a harbor inferred from trade routes or guessed from geography. A harbor documented in cuneiform tablets with the same brutal administrative precision the Sumerians used for grain inventories, tax ledgers, labor assignments, and temple accounts. A harbor measured in cargo weights, in shipment totals, in destination records, in dock receipts, in the names of ships, merchants, captains, and foreign ports. That harbor was Ur, the city connected to the lineage of Gilgamesh, the city of Queen Pwabi, the city of the Great Death Pit, the city whose ziggurat still rises from the Iraqi desert like the fossilized memory of another age. And in the 3rd millennium BCE, Ur was not buried in sand. It was a port city. The Persian Gulf once reached far deeper inland than it does today, placing Ur directly within a maritime network that stretched beyond Mesopotamia's rivers and canals into the open waters of the ancient Near East. And the evidence for that network is not myth. It is paperwork. The UR3 Administrative Archive, one of the largest surviving bureaucratic archives from the ancient world, covers roughly a century between 2112 BCE and 2004 BCE. Thousands of tablets survive from this period. And among them are records of maritime trade so detailed they read like the operating system of an ancient shipping corporation. Cargo manifests, harbor receipts, voyage accounts, crew allocations, import records, export totals, institutional shipping logs, not vague references to trade, operational documents, the ancient equivalent of a maritime registry. When scholars translated portions of these archives through the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative and decades of Assyriological research, something emerged that popular history almost never talks about. The ships were enormous. Not enormous for their time. Enormous in a way that creates a direct problem for the standard model of Bronze Age maritime technology. Because the cargo figures recorded in the UR3 texts describe ships carrying loads that should not exist according to the conventional picture of early seafaring. Let me give you the numbers. The Sumerian unit commonly used in shipping records was the talent, the bailu. One bailu was roughly equivalent to about 30 kilograms. And the largest cargo totals recorded in the maritime texts run into the thousands of bailu. When converted into modern weight measurements, the capacities implied by these records reach 60 tons, 80 tons, 100 tons, and in several cases, over 200 tons of cargo. 200 tons. That is not a primitive fishing vessel. That is not a simple reed boat drifting along the shoreline. That is a major cargo ship. For comparison, many well-documented medieval European cogs, the dominant cargo vessels of the 13th and 14th centuries CE, carried roughly 100 to 200 tons. The Sumerian texts appear to describe vessels operating in the same range nearly 4,000 years earlier. And this is where the academic caution begins. Scholars acknowledge the large cargo figures, but they immediately qualify them. Maybe the bailu varied in weight depending on context. Maybe some totals represent cumulative shipments over multiple voyages. Maybe some records reflect institutional accounting estimates rather than actual measured loads. Each explanation sounds reasonable on its own. But together, they form a pattern. A pattern of systematically reducing the implications of the numbers until they fit the technological expectations historians already have about the Bronze Age. The problem is that the figures are not isolated. They repeat. Across multiple archives. Across multiple years. Across multiple ports. Across multiple administrative contexts. One strange cargo record could be a scribal mistake. Hundreds of large cargo records across a century of maritime administration are not mistakes. Something carried those cargoes. And whatever carried them was large. Now look at where these ships were going. Because the destinations matter just as much as the cargo capacity. The UR3 texts repeatedly describe trade with three major overseas regions: Dilmun, Magan, and Meluhha. These were not mythical lands. They were real trade partners. Dilmun is identified with Bahrain, the island hub in the Persian Gulf that connected Mesopotamia to Indian Ocean commerce. Magan is associated with Oman and the southeastern Arabian Peninsula, famous in antiquity for copper production. And Meluhha. Meluhha is where the mystery expands. Most scholars identify Meluhha with the Indus Valley Civilization. The civilization of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dhalavira. One of the largest urban civilizations on Earth during the 3rd millennium BCE. The distance from Ur to the Indus region by sea was approximately 3,000 to 4,000 kilometers depending on the route. And the Sumerians were trading with it regularly. Not occasionally. Institutionally. At scale. The archaeological evidence exists at both ends of the route. Carnelian beads from the Indus appear in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamian cylinder seals appear in Indus contexts. Lapis lazuli, ivory, exotic woods, metals, and luxury goods moved between the two civilizations for centuries. This trade was real. The goods are in the ground. Which raises the question nobody seems comfortable asking directly. What was carrying them? Because the standard model of Bronze Age seafaring describes relatively small coastal vessels, sewn plank boats, reed craft, and shoreline traders moving cautiously from harbor to harbor. But the cargo totals recorded in the UR3 texts do not fit comfortably inside that model. Not if those numbers mean what they appear to mean. The vessel type most associated with long-distance trade in the Sumerian texts is called the Magan boat. The name itself points toward the Oman route. These ships appear repeatedly in records involving the largest cargo totals. And the texts imply structural complexity. Specialized construction. Specialized maintenance. Specialized craftsmen. The Sumerians had professional shipbuilders. Not occasional laborers improvising boats from reeds. A trained occupational class operating within the palace-temple economy. That matters. Because professional specialization only develops when a technology becomes advanced enough to require accumulated technical expertise. Shipbuilding had already become institutionalized. Which means the maritime tradition behind it was already mature. And yet the developmental timeline remains strangely incomplete. The gap between simple Near Eastern watercraft and the capacities implied by the UR3 shipping records is still not fully explained. Now I want to move from administrative texts to mythology. Because Sumerian myth preserves something important. Not literal engineering blueprints. But memory. Conceptual memory. In the Sumerian text Enki and the World's Order, the god Enki travels in a vessel described almost like a floating palace. A ship large enough to function as an administrative center. A vessel containing personnel, equipment, chambers, and operational space. Not a canoe, not a fishing craft, a maritime structure with internal organization. Then there is the Eridu Genesis, the Sumerian flood narrative that predates the biblical story of Noah. The flood vessel described in that text is enormous. Its dimensions, depending on conversion methods, imply a structure of extraordinary scale. Scholars usually treat this as mythological exaggeration. And perhaps it is. But mythological imagination does not emerge from technological vacuum. Civilizations imagine beyond what they know, but usually not beyond what they can conceptually anchor to reality. And what interests me is this. The same civilization whose myths describe massive vessels also maintains shipping records implying unusually large commercial ships. Not mythical ships. Real ones. Large enough to force uncomfortable questions about Bronze Age maritime capability. Now consider the Indus connection again. Because the Indus Valley Civilization was not primitive. Far from it. At its height around 2500 BCE, it covered a geographic area larger than either Egypt or Mesopotamia. Its cities were laid out on geometric grids with astonishing precision. They had standardized weights and measurements. Advanced drainage systems. Sophisticated urban planning. Large-scale trade infrastructure. And a writing system we still cannot decipher. And this civilization was connected to Sumer by maritime commerce. Regular maritime commerce. Across thousands of kilometers of ocean. That network existed. The question is not whether it existed. The question is how advanced it actually was, because the mechanisms behind it remain strangely underexplored. What kind of ships? What navigational systems? What institutional knowledge? What maps? What astronomical understanding? What inherited maritime tradition? The standard explanation is gradual development. Small coastal traders slowly extending routes over generations until the Gulf and the Indus became connected. And yes, that is plausible. But the UR3 archive does not look like a civilization experimenting with maritime trade for the first time. It looks like a civilization already operating a mature long-distance shipping system. That distinction matters. Now we arrive at navigation. Because moving 200 tons of cargo across 3,000 kilometers of ocean is not only a shipbuilding problem, it is a navigation problem. The key is the monsoon system. The Indian Ocean monsoons reverse seasonally. Southwest winds dominate one part of the year. Northeast winds dominate another. A vessel leaving the Persian Gulf at the correct season could ride predictable winds toward the Indus coast. Months later, the reverse monsoon could carry it home. The voyage becomes possible because the ocean itself turns into a seasonal highway. And the Sumerians clearly understood this. The departure patterns recorded in the maritime texts align closely with monsoon timing. Ships did not leave randomly. Voyages clustered according to seasonal wind behavior. That knowledge required observation. Long-term observation. Generational knowledge. Institutional memory. The Sumerians understood the rhythm of the Indian Ocean. And according to their own traditions, that knowledge was inherited, not invented. In Sumerian mythology, civilization itself was transmitted through the me, the divine principles governing every aspect of organized life. Kingship, writing, measurement, craftsmanship, music, navigation, all were considered received knowledge, and the keeper of that knowledge was Enki, the god associated with wisdom, water, engineering, and the Abzu, the subterranean freshwater realm beneath Eridu. Eridu matters here, because it was not merely a religious center. In the 3rd millennium BCE, Eridu sat near the ancient